Jared and Mrs. Barnes followed me into the hallway. The overhead lights were all broken with pieces of glass littering the floor. There were extension cords and plug-in lights along the floor, providing the light. There were 2 doors to our right. Jared opened the first door, which was just for a supply closet. The shelves were mostly empty, except for a few overturned cleaning supplies. The next door opened to a small conference room. All the chairs and the table were pushed to one side of the room. There were a few bowls of what looked like half-eaten oatmeal on the table. Blankets, sheets, and 4 pillows were scattered across the room. All the other rooms we've seen here, and at the houses we've been in, were always neat and organised.
"Do you think this is where Rick sleeps?" asked Jared.
"I don't know. That is a lot of blankets and pillows for one person," I said. We left the room, closing the door on our way out, and walked to the door at the end of the hallway. I opened the door slowly, unsure what we were going to find on the other side. There were no noises from anyone, which was concerning. If Trish was in trouble, I'm sure she would be screaming for help. The same plug-in lights illuminated this next room, which looked to be where they housed all the electronics. There was another door at the back of the room, as well as a server and router and various other devices and cables in here. Most of them were turned off. There was also a monitor which showed live footage from the various cameras in the building, as well as outside. It was connected to a DVR for a security system. There were feeds from some of the hallways, the dining room, the kitchen, and outside. It was rotating between the different views, with 4 on screen at the same time. "Do you think there's an audio feed too on these?" asked Mrs. Barnes. "I would think so," I said. "He could have heard us in the dining room. I don't think we said anything too bad about him, but we talked about coming here." We watched the feed a little more to see if we'd see Rick anywhere, but all we saw was Katie and Brian in the kitchen grabbing more food for the group. Jared led the way to the door and opened it, revealing stairs leading down into the basement. After all the other houses we had been in, with the roots in the basement, I wasn't too excited to be going down to this one. We went down the stairs to the landing, and I noticed the round, dark enclosure of the security camera on the ceiling as we turned to go the rest of the way down. "Hey look, there's a camera up there," I said. "This area wasn't on the screen we saw. Do you think he has another one, or maybe this one isn't connected?" said Jared. The light shut off before we could answer. It was pitch black in the stairwell. I quickly fished the flashlight out of my pocket and switched it on. "I think that answers your question," said Mrs. Barnes, training the light and my gun on the door at the bottom of the stairs. We continued down. As a non-gun owner my whole life, I was surprised with how comfortable I was getting with holding the handgun. The door at the bottom of the stairs was a solid metal door, so we couldn't see into the room. Jared reached for the handle, while Mrs. Barnes and I stood as ready as we could be for whatever was on the other side.
"It won't open," said Jared. "He must have locked it."
"It opens in towards us, so if we could get the hinges off, we might be able to get in," I said. "Let's go back up and see what we have to use." We got back to the top of the stairs, and I went to open the door. It was locked. "He trapped us," I said. "We need to call for the others before he gets to them," said Mrs. Barnes. Unclipping the walkie-talkie from my pants, I called out to the others. "Jessica, Trish, Arvin, can anyone hear me?" A minute went by. "Is anyone there?" I called into it again. Still, no answer. "Why aren't they answering?" I said, not expecting a response. "There's a lot of our people back there," said Mrs. Barnes. "They can take care of themselves. They can handle Rick." I would like to think they could, but there must be a reason Rick has been able to last so long. What did he say before? That he was studying them. It wouldn't be safe to try to shoot at the doors. The metal shrapnel would do a lot of damage to us. All we could do was wait. Jared sat down on the steps and put his head in his hands.
"Rick said we underestimated the change people. Looks like we underestimated him too," he said.
"Dad!" Ali's voice came through the walkie-talkie. "Ali, are you okay?" I said. "I am," she said in a quiet voice. "I'm hiding in the closet with Jessica, Katie and Clara." Where is everybody else? I said. They're in the room, sleeping, she said. I mean, they passed out. Jessica said it must have been the food they ate. You didn't have any? I asked. No, we weren't hungry, she said. I have to be quiet now. They're back. Come help us, Dad. They? I wonder how many people are with him, said Mrs. Barnes. I knew he couldn't survive on his own. I couldn't stand waiting to know if she was okay, powerless to do anything at all to help. Mrs. Barnes paced up and down the stairs. It had to be even worse for her, not being able to at least hear her daughter's voice. The seconds continued to tick by in slow motion, but then, finally, Jessica's voice came through this time on the radio. They're taking them out on the cots, she said. It is Rick and another man. Where are you? We're trapped in the stairwell. He locked us in, I said. Where is Carolyn? Mrs. Barnes stopped pacing and looked at me. She's still in the room on the floor. They haven't gotten to her yet, she said. Rick is hooking IVs up to everyone, so it's taking them a while to get everyone. I don't know where they are taking them. Do you have any weapons, and is there any chance you can escape? I asked. No. It all happened so fast once everyone started passing out. We only had time to run and hide when we heard someone coming, she said. How long are they gone when they leave the room? I asked. I don't know. Maybe 2 minutes, she said. Do you think you could escape while they are gone? If you can get us out, we can stop them, I said. I'm too slow, said Jessica. But Katie said she'll do it. I'll keep the kids with me. It is too dangerous to have them try to go too. Okay. Tell Katie good luck. Keep us updated if you can, I said. We'll try, she said. We were back to waiting helplessly. None of us talked. None of us sat still. Every little noise I heard had me quickly looking at the walkie-talkie, hoping for an update. She made it out of the room, Jessica said. Are Rick and the other person saying anything about what they are doing? I asked. No, said Jessica. We've only heard Rick talk, and it has all been instructions or commands. That's weird, I said. Anything else you've noticed that could help? Just that the other man kind of stands around, waiting for Rick to direct him, she said. Thanks. Let's hope Katie gets to us soon. Be safe, I said. Same to you. After another few minutes of pacing and fidgeting, there were some noises at the door. We backed down the stairs a few steps with our weapons ready. The door opened up and Katie said, Don't shoot, it's me. Thank you for getting us, I said. Let's go save the others. We ran back to the garage area and to the door leading to the main area of the fire station. I glanced over at the garage doors and saw a bunch of faces looking in through the windows. Look over there, said Mrs. Barnes. That doesn't look good, but let's worry about them later, I said. She nodded, and then Katie slowly opened the door. I'm not sure where Rick and that other man were taking them, so let's be quiet, Katie said. She led us back down the hall, and we stopped just outside the door to the dining room. I could hear Rick's voice in there, shouting something to the other man. I leaned carefully in through the doorway to try to see what was going on. They were at the back of the room, by the door that had the padlock on it. The door was propped open part way, and it looked like the cot was stuck on it. Mrs. Barnes' daughter, Carolyn, was passed out on the cot. The other man was standing with his arms hanging on his side, while Rick angrily shouted at him as he tried to get the cot through the door. They have your daughter, I said to Mrs. Barnes. It is only the two of them, and that other guy doesn't seem to be much of a threat. Let's go in and get her out of there. Okay, but don't shoot at them. We'll get them away from her first before we do anything, she said. We rushed through the door and I ran over to Rick, pushing him hard away from the cot. He stumbled back and fell to the floor. I looked back at the other man, and he was still just standing there. Mrs. Barnes grabbed the cot and carefully pulled it away from the door with Jared's help. I pointed my gun at Rick and said, What do you think you're doing? He started to get up until I kicked him in the chest. After he winced from the pain, he looked up at me and smiled. Surviving, he said. Mrs. Barnes stepped over and spat in his face. We've been surviving just fine, without hurting anyone else, she said. What were you planning on doing with us? Keeping us sedated until you give us over to them? I've told you before. I've been studying them, and we've come to a mutual agreement. I want to live, and they want more people, he said. I checked on the other man again, but he still hadn't moved. Turning my attention back to Rick, I said, "So you've been helping them this whole time? How many people have you helped them change?" "It has been going on for a long time, so way too many to count." I did feel bad at first, but then I realised I really was helping them. They were always tired, anxious and scared, and had lost people close to them. I was helping them escape from that. "I can still help you," he said. "Shut up!" yelled Mrs. Barnes. "You're not helping anyone!" She aimed her rifle at him. "You're never going to get out of here as yourselves without me," he said. "There's too many of them, and they will only go when they get what they want." She kept her rifle pointed at him. "Who is this other guy, and what did you do to him?" she asked. "I don't remember what his name is, and I don't think they use their names anymore once they've evolved," he said, while starting to slowly push himself off of the floor. This time, Mrs. Barnes sent him back to the ground by kicking his arms out. Rick yelled in pain as he fell again to the floor. "Fine, I'll stay on the ground, but stop doing that," he said. "Why doesn't he try to get us?" I said. "I gave him an injection of the same sedative that knocked your group out. It doesn't make them sleep, it just keeps them calm," he said. "Are you going to let me get back up now?" Jared spoke up. "I think we should tie them up or something. Then we can figure out how we're going to get out of here." "You're not getting out of here without my help," said Rick. Mrs. Barnes gave him a kick to the stomach, causing him to double over, and hopefully to keep his mouth shut for a while. I didn't know what we should do with him, but for now, tying him up seemed like a good idea. "A good idea. Want to go see what might work from the supply closets?" I said to Jared. He nodded his head and ran out the door. I called out to Ollie and Jessica on the radio. "We made it out and stopped Rick. We're going to tie them up, and then it should be safe to come out." "Sounds good," said Jessica. "I'm glad you are all okay." Rick looked like he was about to say something, but thought better of it when Mrs. Barnes stepped closer to him and raised her foot in the air. Jared came running back in the room, holding something. "I found some zip ties and some rope," he said. "We should get the quiet guy first, since we don't know how long he'll stay calm like this." "Hey you!" I yelled, not sure if it would work. "Sit down over there," I said, while pointing to a chair by the table. The man just looked at me at first, but then walked slowly over to the chair and sat down. Katie went with Jared over to him and worked on securing him to the chair. After a few minutes, they came back. "We're not sure how long that will hold him, but we've tied his arms and legs to the chair, so it should at least slow him down if he comes after us," Katie said. "What should we do with Rick?" "Let's keep him with us. If he still wants to survive, he'd better help us," Mrs. Barnes said. "We should tie his hands behind his back first." Rick didn't put up a fight, while Jared used a few zip ties to secure his hands behind his back. He then pulled Rick up from the ground and said, "Now what do we do?" I looked over at Mrs. Barnes and Carolyn. "Why don't you take her back to the training room and see if Jessica can help? We can see where the door leads and find Trish." Rick let out a quick laugh, and Mrs. Barnes stepped over to him. "What's so funny? What did you do to her?" she yelled. He smiled at her and said, "I didn't do anything to her. She's just resting comfortably like the others." I didn't know how much time we'd have before the changed people outside started trying to come in, or until the sedative wore off on the man on the chair, so I tried to hurry it along. "We'll get her," I said. "You just take care of Carolyn and see if you can help the others." Mrs. Barnes glared at Rick for another few seconds, who just continued to smile, and then began taking the cot out of the room. "Is Trish through here?" asked Katie. "Yes," said Rick. "I mean, that's where I left her." I opened the door all the way, and we went into a short hallway that led to an elevator. "We must have missed part of the second floor," Jared said, as we entered the elevator. "Not very observant, are you?" said Rick. Jared gave him a push into the elevator, and Katie pushed the button for the basement. "What are we going to find down here?" I said to Rick. He didn't answer, but from his reflection in the elevator doors, it looked like he was smiling again.